"Get out of the doorway. Someone like you isn't worthy of stepping into our bar." That was the sentence my daughter-in-law Brianna slammed straight into my face in front of the whole crowd. She said it slowly, clearly, as if grinding my dignity under her heel. The grand opening yesterday was only for important people. I froze on the spot, but exactly 3 seconds later, a man's voice rose behind me. "That's enough. If you knew her secret, she'd drop to her knees right here." A stranger, tall, cold, with eyes sharp enough to strip a soul bare, held out a sleek black USB. He said something that stopped my heartbeat. Brianna's real name isn't Brianna, and she's hiding something that could destroy your entire family. I wanted to collapse, yet a part of me wanted to stand up and fight. Now I ask you, if someone humiliated you like trash, would you stay silent or rip their mask off? Would you let the wicked walk over you or make them bow? Stay. You haven't seen anything yet. Tap follow and comment. No one has the right to degrade me. I called just to ask a simple question about my son's bar opening, but instead, my daughter-in-law threw at me. It was yesterday, and it's not for unimportant people. Just a few words, but cruel enough to shatter 20 years of motherhood I had poured into Daniel. Joy turned into humiliation. That afternoon, I stood in my kitchen, my hands still wet from washing dishes, my heart fluttering with excitement, thinking I'd be part of Daniel's big day. I dialed him, hoping to hear his voice so I could say something very motherly. "I need to know the opening day so I can come support you, maybe help out a little." But before I could finish, Brianna's voice cut sharply into the line like a blade full of disdain. I never imagined a daughter-in-law would aim at her mother-in-law. "It was yesterday, Margaret. And you understand not everyone should show up at an opening. People who don't match the atmosphere would ruin the bar's image." I froze, feeling my face burn, as if someone had stripped me bare in the middle of a crowd. Even the hum of the refrigerator turned harsh. I heard my heart break clearly, one beat at a time. Daniel stayed silent like a stranger. I tried to steady my voice, though my throat felt scraped raw. "Daniel, did you know about this?" On the other end, he didn't answer right away. I heard him breathe, then footsteps, as if he was stepping away from Brianna just to speak. "Mom, Briz said, you don't fit the vibe of the opening. And yesterday, there were influencers, investors. We wanted to keep it tight." He spoke without lifting his head. I could feel it without seeing him. When Daniel was little, he used to hug me whenever he was scared, used to say, "Mom, you're the person I love most." But today, his voice trembled, not because he cared for me, but because he feared his wife. I swallowed the lump rising in my chest, but it stuck halfway. His silence hurt more than Brianna's insult. My son stood with someone else, and I was tossed out of his big day like waste. A mysterious figure appeared. I drove to the bar anyway, even if uninvited. Partly because I couldn't believe this was real, partly because I wanted to see with my own eyes the place I had quietly poured money into so Daniel could build his dream. The sky dimmed. Wind brushed across my face. Salty, maybe sweat, maybe tears, I couldn't tell. The bar glowed under bright lights. I stood outside staring at the expensive sign I had helped fund. When I touched the glass, still bearing faint traces of the paint we had worked on together, a man's voice rose behind me. "You're not the first one she's erased from her life." I turned. A tall man stood a few steps away, his eyes cutting through the quiet facade I was trying to hold on to. I had never seen him before. He tilted his head slightly, his voice low but firm, as if he knew far more than I had ever spoken aloud. "She has a habit of doing this. First, she removes the old ones, then anyone who gets in her way." I shivered. The wind blew hard, but it wasn't as cold as what he said. Why did he know? Bree humiliated me publicly right at the entrance of my son's bar, while Daniel stood behind his wife like a shadow afraid to speak. When I thought I had endured enough shame, the mysterious man from before, Lucas, appeared again and left a warning that sent a chill down my spine. The humiliation in front of the bar. I walked toward the entrance of the bar, the warm yellow light spilling onto the wet pavement, making everything look like a stage where I was the character standing in the wrong place. Brianna stepped out, blocking the doorway as if guarding a world I would never belong to. She smirked, her gaze sharp, as though she wanted to erase me from the scene. "What are you doing here, Margaret? This bar is for successful people, for people who create value, not for an older generation to walk in and be an eyesore." I heard each word drop at my feet like stones. I had known hurt before, but never in this form. Bree's sentence felt like a blade sliding across skin, not drawing blood, but leaving a long cut that would not heal. I opened my mouth, trying to hold on to the last shred of dignity, but my hands clenched involuntarily as if they were trying to anchor me. Bree tilted her head, her voice loud enough for everyone around to hear. "How much did you even contribute? A few spare bills? And you think you have rights? People who don't know their place only ruin the picture." Those words lodged in my throat, not because they were true, but because they came from someone I once welcomed into my home with open arms. I looked straight into Bree's eyes and realized I no longer saw the daughter-in-law who once called me mom. Standing before me now was someone else, colder, sharper, far more dangerous. I stepped back slightly to keep myself from slipping further into humiliation, but my feet felt nailed to the ground. Then a question slipped from my lips, weaker than I intended. "Why are you saying this to me, Bree?" She only lifted the corner of her mouth as if I had asked the most foolish question. The people around us started watching me like they were observing a play where the main character was denied entry to her own son's bar. Their eyes carried sympathy and curiosity, all of which made me feel bare in the cold air. At that moment, Daniel stepped out. Daniel stood behind his wife like a shadow. Daniel stood right behind Bree, his head lowered. The light cast across his face made him look smaller than his 30 years. I looked at my son, trying to find something familiar, something to cling to as I faced rejection. "Daniel," I called softly, "you let your wife speak to your mother like that?" He lifted his head just a little, then dropped it again, as if even looking at me was too heavy a task. "I don't want to cause trouble," Daniel said quietly. So softly I had to lean in to catch it. "You don't want to cause trouble?" I repeated, my voice cracking. "And what is this then?" Daniel stepped back, his hand brushing Bree's back as though seeking support. "Mom, I just want things calm," Bree said. "Today isn't right for you to come in. The bar is still finalizing its atmosphere." Atmosphere. Because I did not fit the atmosphere, my son stood by while someone else humiliated me. I did not know whether to cry or laugh. Daniel had once clung to my legs sobbing when other children teased him. He once held my hand tightly when I dropped him off at college. But the man standing in front of me now, trembling and weak, was protecting his wife's feelings more than his mother's dignity. Bree placed her hand on Daniel's shoulder as if marking her territory. "Come inside. Don't drag out something meaningless." Meaningless. So my presence, my love, the years I raised him through hardship, all condensed into that single word. I stepped back, not from shame, but from fear that if I stayed 1 second longer, I would say something that would sever the last string between me and Daniel. As I turned to leave, a familiar voice rose from the shadows beside the bar. Lucas stepped out of the darkness. The streetlight caught his figure, making him look as though he had stepped out of a thick layer of fog. Lucas, the man who appeared when I stood outside the bar yesterday, now faced me with a far more serious expression. He did not glance at Bree or Daniel, only at me. Something in his eyes made me feel he understood more than I had spoken. "You should be careful," Lucas said, and pulled a business card from his pocket, placing it in my hand. "If you want to know who Bree really is, call me, before it's too late." I gripped the card, the paper colder than the night air. "Too late? What do you mean?" I asked. But Lucas only looked at me for a moment before walking away, as if the answer was beyond what I was ready to hear. I watched his silhouette fade around the corner, my mind full of questions without names. And what unsettled me the most was the feeling that from that moment on, I had stepped into a story Bree was determined to bury at any cost. The days after the confrontation at the bar entrance, I thought I would finally get some peace, but everything only began to open like a door into an endless darkness. Strange invoices appeared. Debts that did not belong to me were registered under my name. Then Lucas sent evidence showing Bree had lived under another name. Each piece rotated around me, pushing me toward a truth I never imagined. Invoices under my name but belonging to the bar. One morning, I received a thick envelope shoved into the crack of my door. I assumed it was advertising, but when I saw the words "overdue notice," my heart jerked. I opened the envelope, papers falling across the table, the numbers jumping at me as if mocking me. Audio equipment costs, beer inventory, licensing fees for the grand opening, all under my name. In the corner of each invoice was a scribbled signature resembling mine, but strangely distorted. A collections agent called right after, his voice flat like reading the news. "We cannot collect the fee you signed for responsibility." I sat upright, my hand gripping the edge of the table. "I have never signed anything." The agent paused a moment, then replied with a tone mixed between suspicion and indifference. "Your signature is on file. If you wish to dispute it, you must submit a written request." I stared at the papers, each line of ink feeling artificial, mocking. Who forged my name? Who manipulated my card and signature to pay for Daniel's bar? The draft blowing through the window was not as cold as the feeling of being pulled into something filthy. I picked up one invoice, my hand trembling. The line reading, "Paid with auxiliary card," made my head heavy. I had never issued an auxiliary card. I had never given anyone permission to use my account. When I called back to confront them, the agent added one sentence that made my skin prickle. "Ma'am, all transfer requests were made from a device logged in with the same address as the bar." I set the phone down, my breath uneven. I no longer doubted. Something was being hidden, and it was tied directly to Brianna. Daniel revealed his fear. I called Daniel to the house. He walked in looking more drained than I had ever seen him. He sat down as though waiting for a sentence. I placed the stack of invoices in front of him. "When did you use my card?" Daniel intertwined his hands, his shoulders tightening. I didn't know it was this serious." I looked straight into his eyes, leaving him nowhere to run. "Who used my account, Daniel?" The moment he lowered his head, I knew the answer before he spoke. "Bree said you didn't need to know. I'm sorry, Mom." His apology thickened the air around us. He looked like a child caught stealing money for candy, not a grown man who had thrown his mother into debt. But behind that fear was something deeper, a dim shadow he did not dare name. "Why did you let your wife do this?" I asked, my voice rough. Daniel trembled slightly, his breath catching. Mom, you don't understand, Bree. She has a way of making me think I should listen. I'm afraid of losing her." I leaned back in the chair, my chest tightening. I did not know what Bree had done to Daniel to turn him into a compliant shadow, but from that moment, I knew I could not take his word about her ever again. Before leaving, Daniel looked at me as if trying to say something, but he stayed silent. The door closed behind him, leaving me in a house quiet enough to suffocate. The silence confirmed the truth I had tried to avoid. I was losing my son to a woman I had never truly understood. Lucas sent a photo of Bree under another name. That evening, as I sorted through the invoices again, my phone vibrated. A message from Lucas. No greeting, no explanation, just a single photo. I opened it and my heart clenched as though squeezed. It was Brianna, but the text beneath shattered every thought in my head. Amber Cole. I zoomed in, searching for a mistake, but that face, those eyes, that half smile, they could not belong to anyone else. Another message arrived immediately after. She lives with many names, and each name comes with a new victim. I stared at the line until my eyes burned. The invoices, the forged signatures, the control over Daniel. Everything aligned into a straight line pointing at Bree, or rather at Amber Cole. If what Lucas claimed was true, then my daughter-in-law was not just sharp-tongued or arrogant. She was a storm with intent, and I had walked into its center without knowing. The final question echoed in my mind, sending a chill down my spine. My daughter-in-law is not Brianna. After the photo with the name Amber Cole appeared on my phone screen, a feeling like I had stepped straight into a bottomless well wrapped around me. I knew I couldn't sit still for another second. I had to know the truth about the woman pulling the strings around my son, about why Lucas appeared at the exact time and place, as if he had been watching every breath Bree took. The story was opening thick as gray fog, and there was no turning back. The secret meeting, I met Lucas in a small cafe tucked deep inside an alley. The dim light inside made it feel like we were sitting in a private compartment, cut off from the outside world. Lucas set his phone down and looked directly at me, his gaze steady. "She took $38,000 from me and vanished," he said in a low voice, as if describing an old wound still bleeding in his chest. "I tracked her for 3 years." My hands tightened together, my mind running through every image of Bree, every smile, every carefully staged hug I once believed was real. "Why did you follow her?" I asked, my voice rough. Lucas leaned closer, his voice dropping until I had to tilt my head to hear. "I wanted to stop her from doing this to anyone else. I wasn't fast enough to save the ones before you." His words made my heartbeat stutter. If I wasn't the first, then how many people had Bree peeled open like a ripe fruit, taking all the good parts and leaving the rot behind? Lucas continued, each word steady but wrapped in layers of resentment. "Amber always chooses people with trusting families, financial stability, people who crave being seen as the dependable one. Then she transforms into the perfect persona." I swallowed a metallic bitterness. I had watched Bree play the perfect role in front of Daniel, in front of my whole family, in front of me. Back then, I thought I was lucky to have a well-mannered daughter-in-law. Now, all I saw was a mask, not a woman. The rescuer con, I recalled every silky phrase Bree ever used in those early days. "Let me handle it. You just sign," she would say whenever Daniel needed money, her hand resting on mine as if soothing me. I had mistaken it for kindness, for care. Now every word felt like a needle stitch in a trap she was sewing around me. Lucas observed my face before continuing. "Her pattern never changes. First, she makes the victim believe she's the only one who understands them. Then she begins offering help, offering to sign, to manage, to take care of things. He held my gaze. Does that sound familiar? My throat burned. I remembered the forged signatures on invoices, Daniel whispering that Bree said I didn't need to know anything, the way she called me an outdated generation right in front of the bar. The pieces fit too perfectly together. A memory slammed into me so vividly it made me dizzy. The first day I visited their home, Bree smiled, handed me a cup of hot tea, and whispered, "Don't worry, with me here, I'll take care of Daniel and everything. Take care of everything." She had taken care of it, indeed, in ways I never imagined. The ways of someone who sees a victim opening the door and stepping in on their own. The heaviest warning, Lucas leaned back, his eyes dark. He spoke slowly, every word like a hammer against my chest. Amber will gradually make people think you're losing your mind. When that happens, your assets will belong to her. The room constricted around me, the clinking spoon from a nearby table echoing like a tunnel sound. I saw the overdue notices, the words Bree used to shove me aside the way Daniel backed into her shadow as soon as I asked questions. Everything pointed to a single destination. I was being boxed into the role of the confused mother, an easy-to-control elder whom society wouldn't believe if she ever claimed she was being deceived. Lucas noticed my prolonged silence. "She's already succeeded with several people before you. They lost everything, from assets to family. I don't want you to be next." I placed my hand on the table to steady myself, my palm cold as ice. Every word from Lucas opened a door to a darker place. I tried to inhale, but the air felt thin. I looked again at the photo of Bree under the name Amber Cole, staring back at me with the same eyes that once looked at me like I was nothing. A thought swept over me, chilling my spine so sharp I could hear my heartbeat drop into my chest. Was I already inside her trap? I left the cafe after meeting Lucas with the feeling that the ground beneath my feet was sinking a little more with each step. The truth about Amber Cole kept circling in my head, peeling itself open layer by layer, as if someone were tearing Bree's mask off right in front of me. But before I could steady myself, new blows hit harder and faster than I expected. Bree didn't wait for my response. She struck first, precise and merciless, as if she had planned every move long before I realized anything was wrong. The gas shut off, requested by me. That morning, I heard a truck stop in front of my house. 2 technicians stepped down with clipboards in hand. One of them looked around and called out, "Mrs. Laura Stone, we're here to shut off your gas as requested." I walked out, my chest tightening. What shut off? I never requested that. The man checked the paper. "The debt transfer is under your name. The overdue fee was moved from a linked account. We follow the system." A cold wind seemed to rip across my skin. I knew exactly who was behind this. She had begun transferring the bar's debts into my name to build a history of unstable finances. I forced myself to stay calm. "Please wait, I'm calling the company." They shrugged as if they were used to elderly people denying things. I stepped back into the house, my hands trembling. When the company confirmed my account was perfectly clean, I exhaled, but fear stayed lodged inside me. Bree was done testing. She was attacking. Neighbors looking at me like a stranger. That afternoon, when I brought in the mail, I caught Mrs. Howard's eyes from her yard. They were no longer friendly. There was caution there, even pity. I forced a smile. "How are you?" She hesitated. "I heard some things. I hope you're all right." I froze. "What things?" She lowered her voice. "Bree stopped by. She said you sometimes talk to the wall and forget your own name." My body stiffened. The breeze hit my clothes, and for a moment I felt like a shadow on my own front lawn. Bree was crafting a story. constructing an image of me slowly slipping. I closed my eyes, breath-catching. Every lie she spread was a blade carving into my dignity and the relationships I had nurtured for years. Humiliation and helplessness washed over me. Why couldn't my son see this? Why did he let a woman rewrite my life like she was casting a character in a play? Lucas reads the incident report. That evening, I told Lucas everything. Within minutes, he called back, his voice so cold it made my fingers numb. I knew she would strike, but this speed means she's afraid. Afraid of what? I asked, my voice shaking. Afraid you've seen her real face. Afraid you'll fight. And when Amber is afraid, she builds incompetency cases. I gripped the phone until my knuckles hurt, he continued. This is just the first stage. She's creating patterns of unusual behavior around you. Once she collects enough, she'll file it with the court. For what purpose? To show you're unfit to manage your assets. Then the guardian would be Daniel. My son's name rang with bitter irony. Daniel, the child I raised with everything I had, now standing beside a woman who intended to erase me. Lucas lowered his voice. And you know who would really be in control? I swallowed the rising tightness in my throat. Why is she doing this to me? Lucas paused. Because you no longer serve her interests. When a victim stops being useful, Amber, turns them into a justification to seize everything. His words fell like stones onto my chest. Bree wanted to turn me into her evidence, a living report for the story she was writing. I walked to the window and looked at the quiet street. The street lights had just turned on, casting a pale yellow glow over everything. I felt the darkness pulling closer, as if I were slowly fading out of my own life. Bree was doing exactly what Lucas warned, isolating me from the community, shaping the image of a deteriorating mind, fabricating unusual behaviors that anyone could repeat later as something they had noticed all along. My hands shook. If she succeeds, will I lose everything? I thought I had braced myself for any blow Bree might deliver. But that morning, when the knock on the door came and the mail carrier handed me a thick envelope stamped by the court, something inside me shattered all at once. Lucas's warnings hadn't even settled before reality lunged at me like a sharp blade, slicing through the last layer of hope I had tried to hold on to. The summons that made my hands tremble. I stood on my porch, opening the envelope with hands so unsteady I nearly dropped it. The paper inside was stark, cold, sharp, like a death certificate for my dignity. Request for competency assessment of Mrs. Margaret Lewis. I read it aloud, my voice breaking immediately. Tears spilled down my face before I could stop them. Shame twisted inside me, pulling in fear, sorrow, and despair. I clung to the doorway to keep from collapsing. The court had believed the story Bree crafted. That meant every word she whispered behind my back, every forged bill, every staged incident had sunk into the ears of the people who now held my fate. A single thought cracked through my mind, sharp as breaking glass. Am I about to be declared incompetent in front of the world? Daniel abandons me? That afternoon, I called Daniel over. I tried to speak calmly, though my eyes were still swollen. I handed him the paper. Daniel, look at this. They want to evaluate me. Do you know anything about this? Daniel glanced at it and sighed, his shoulders sinking as if I were inconveniencing him. You're thinking too badly of Bree. She's trying to help you. You need rest. I stared at him. Rest? Look at what they're doing to me. You must see who's pushing this. Daniel shook his head, avoiding my eyes. Bree says you're stressed, imagining things. I trust her. A blow landed right in my back, making my spine seize. The child I carried in my arms, the one I worked 2 jobs to raise, stood before me like a stranger, even defending the woman who wanted to erase me from my own life. You truly believe I'm losing my mind? I asked, voice raw. Daniel said nothing. His silence was harsher than any insult. He turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in my darkening house, listening to the door close like a lock snapping around my throat. I understood then that I was entirely alone. The wanted file? That evening, still frozen at the dining table, Lucas called and told me to meet him at a parking lot by a shopping center. His voice was low and urgent. "You must come now. I found something." I drove there, the cold wind hitting my neck as I stepped out of the car. Lucas stood by his vehicle with a thick file in hand, his expression unwavering. "You need to be steady," he said, opening the file. The first page nearly stopped my heart. A photograph so clear it punched the breath out of me. Bree's face with slightly longer hair, but unmistakably her. Under the photo was the name Amber Cole. Lucas turned to the next page, stamped in bold red, federal warrant, charge organized financial fraud. I stared at the papers as if staring into an abyss. Lucas let out a sharp breath. "This file is from 5 years ago. She vanished after taking money from at least 3 victims. They all shared the same traits, living alone, older, with savings, and lacking someone to protect them." I pressed a hand to my mouth. "Are you saying I'm on that list?" "You're the perfect target," Lucas said, each word dropping like a weight. "And now she's forcing you into incapacity status to legally seize everything." My whole body shook, blood drained from my face. I stepped back. "I have been living with a criminal," Lucas looked at me quietly. And I knew the answer was already written in his eyes. Am I living with a con artist? Learning that Brianna was a federal fraud criminal shook me so hard, I felt like my soul had been pulled out of my body. But that was only the surface. Lucas said what I knew wasn't even the worst part yet, and it seemed fate wanted me to see the darkest face Bree had hidden for years. I had thought I was her only victim. I was wrong. The tragedies of others were repeating themselves over my life step by step. The old victim's file. That evening, as I sat in my living room, surrounded by papers that felt as shattered as I was, Lucas called, his voice low, broken, as though holding something back. "I want you to hear someone," he said, "one of her former victims." Before I could react, a ragged breath came through the phone. Then, sobbing tore through the line like fabric being ripped. A woman, her voice shaking so violently it chilled my skin. I'm Caroline," she said through her crying. "She took my money, and she took my husband's trust. He couldn't survive it. He took his own life because he believed he ruined our family." I covered my mouth, tears burning my eyes. Caroline continued, voice crumbling. "She said she loved us, then disappeared with everything in our account. I thought I had lost my mind because no one believed my story. I listened to her cries, her gasps for breath, and in that moment, I saw myself in her. I saw Daniel in her husband. I saw her home once warm, then collapsing into darkness like a flame being pinched out." Lucas spoke again, voice heavy. "Caroline was victim number 2. There were 3 more. One almost lost her house. One was falsely sued. And the 4th vanished from everyone's life after Amber took everything." I understood what he meant. Vanished meaning either running from shame or no longer walking this earth. The identical fraud pattern. After the call, I sat still, looking at the papers on my table. Each victim Lucas described seemed to appear before me. What did they have in common? People who believed in kindness. People who were lulled by her gentle voice. People slowly pushed into dependency, then molded into burdens who needed to sign over responsibility. I replayed every word Brittany ever said to me, every action, every time she told Daniel I needed care. It was identical. A pattern repeated like a song. She only changed her face, her role, but the hands reaching into her victim's assets were always the same. I remembered the day Bree looked at me from head to toe at the bar entrance and said, "This bar is for successful people, not for the older generation." That sentence used to be humiliation. Now it was evidence. She saw me as a harvestable asset. And Daniel she saw as the perfect puppet. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw not only pain. Something else was rising. A fire Bree never expected. The decision to rise up. When I told Lucas everything, he stood silent for a long moment, as if giving me space to breathe. Then he placed his hand on the stack of files. "Mrs. Laura, if you don't fight, you will lose your life," he said slowly. "Amber does not stop. She only stops when her victims have nothing left." I wiped my tears with the back of my hand. The trembling inside me shifted into something harder, steadier, like my spine straightened after years bent down. "Daniel still believes her," I said. "I lost my son right before my eyes." Lucas met my gaze. "You won't get him back unless you expose her. The truth is the only thing that can save both you and Daniel." I inhaled deeply. Everything that had happened, everything I had endured, everything I had lost, gathered into one answer. "I will fight," I said, my voice no longer shaking. Lucas nodded. "Then, from now on, we strike back." I had been too afraid, too patient, too silent. Now I had no reason left to retreat. I looked out the window where the night was dropping over the street, and I whispered to myself, "Now it's my turn to strike." When I said I will fight, something inside me shifted. The fear was still there, but it stepped back to make room for another force, as if everything Bree had done had forged me into metal. I knew I couldn't win alone, and I couldn't fight with emotions. I had to fight with truth, documents, evidence, and every wound she had carved into my life. Collecting every financial wound, I opened every drawer and pulled out every bill I once trembled over, thinking they were my own mistakes. I spread everything across the table, seeing myself more as an investigator than a desperate mother. Every invoice, every transfer, every forged signature I recorded carefully. Bree's words, "Let me handle it," echoed in my head. I no longer heard kindness in them. I heard a trap, the tightening of a rope. I wrote everything in chronological order, including the manipulative things Bree had told me and Daniel. I remembered clearly, every time she urged me to sign something, "Don't worry, this is for Daniel," or "You don't need to understand everything." Now, every sentence had become evidence of her deceit. Lucas looked at the stack of papers and nodded. "She took a lot from you. That means you also have a lot of proof." Hearing that for the first time in weeks, my chest felt slightly lighter. The lawyer builds a strategy. Lucas brought me to a lawyer named Grant, a middle-aged man whose sharp eyes contrasted his calm demeanor. We sat in his small office with all the documents I collected spread across the table, along with the reports Lucas provided. Grant flipped through each page, pausing long at forged signatures or suspicious invoices. I watched him the way someone watches a surgeon examine their heart. Finally, he set the file down. "Mrs. Margaret, we will not only prove you're competent." I looked at him, waiting for the rest. "We will expose her." Each word lit up a corner of my darkness. I had never imagined hearing something like that from a lawyer. Grant continued, "Amber Cole or Brianna committed multiple financial crimes that were never fully investigated. If we present these findings, along with testimony from past victims Lucas found, we can initiate a formal investigation. In that case, the competency request against you becomes irrelevant. Lucas stood beside me, arms crossed. You see, you're no longer a vulnerable victim. You're becoming a key witness. I inhaled deeply. I didn't see myself as a woman being pushed aside anymore. I saw myself as someone who could stand and protect the people Bree had destroyed. But Grant reminded me, we must move fast. Someone like her won't stay still for long. Lucas discovers the escape plan. Grant's warning hadn't even cooled when Lucas called me near midnight, his voice urgent and tight. Laura, I checked the travel patterns Amber used before. I sat up. You found something? It's bad, Lucas said. She booked a flight out of the U.S. under a new identity. My heart dropped. Lucas continued. This time, she's using the name Hannah Price. The flight leaves in 3 days. If you don't act now, she'll disappear clean. Once she leaves the country, everything is gone. I pressed my hand to my forehead, feeling anger and fear swirl together. If I lose, she disappears forever. Lucas paused. Not just you. The other victims lose their only chance at justice. His words tightened everything inside me. There was no turning back. No more time for hesitation. If she escaped, all the pain endured by me, by Caroline, by the people who died or lost everything would be buried forever. I looked out the window, the night thickening like the thoughts in my head. I had to move faster than her. Faster than the plane ticket she thought would erase all her sins. If I lose, she disappears forever. On the day of the hearing, the sky was gray, as if a layer of ash had settled over everything I once knew. I walked into the courtroom feeling like I was stepping into the rib cage of a giant beast, where every gaze fixed itself on me with the prejudice Bree had planted over the past weeks. I heard the sound of papers shuffling, shoes tapping softly, the murmurs of strangers discussing whether I was incompetent. But I kept walking straight because I knew Lucas was out there somewhere and because I refused to let Bree wipe my life clean one more time. Bree fabricates a perfect tragedy. The hearing began with a statement from Bree's attorney. She stood up wearing the face of an award-winning actress, her eyes glistening just enough to convince anyone who didn't know the truth. Your Honor, my mother-in-law, Margaret Lewis, has shown signs of paranoia, aggression toward neighbors, and poses a danger to herself, Bree said, her voice trembling like she was heartbroken. I stood there watching her dab tears with a tissue, seeing her shoulders tremble as if she were the victim. The entire room went silent, so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Bree continued her performance. We only want to protect her. She no longer recognizes her son in many moments. She believes people are watching her, sabotaging her. We fear she may harm herself. Nods appeared across the room. Some eyes looked at me with sympathy mixed with suspicion. I couldn't speak, not because I was lost for words, but because I was staring at Bree like she was a stranger wearing a familiar face. She crafted a flawless tragedy using her voice, her eyes, and her tears like weapons. I clenched my hands so tight, my nails dug into my palm. If I didn't know the truth, maybe even I would have believed her. Daniel takes her side, and I feel myself die a little. Then Daniel was called. My son walked down the aisle with slumped shoulders and hesitant steps. When the judge asked, "Do you believe your mother needs guardianship?" Daniel swallowed and glanced at Bree before answering. "I just want my mom to be safe," he said softly. "My wife is right. Mom has said things that aren't like her." I heard every word, as if my heart were being torn open. I looked at my son, but his eyes were no longer on me. They were on the woman sitting behind him, the woman who had pulled him from my arms with honeyed poison. Tears streamed down my face faster than I could wipe them away. I wanted to call his mane, wanted to ask if he remembered all the years I raised him, protected him, but my mouth locked up, unable to form a sound. That moment, I understood Caroline's pain, understood why her husband broke, understood the cruelty of being looked at with suspicion by your own blood. The whole room leaned toward Bree, and I stood on the opposite side alone, enough that even the air felt heavier. Lucas burst through the door. The judge was about to ask my lawyer to speak when the courtroom doors slammed open. The loud crash made everyone whip around. Lucas walked in, his face taut like a pulled wire, followed by 2 federal agents in jackets marked with their investigative unit. He stood in the center of the room, his voice sharp and steady. "The person who needs a competency evaluation is not Mrs. Margaret," he said, eyes locked onto Bree. "It's her, Amber Cole." The room gasped as if someone had sucked all the air out. Bree shot up from her seat, her face draining white before she forced a trembling smile. I don't know what you're talking about." Lucas slammed a stack of documents onto the judge's bench. The red stamps and official seals I had seen the night before shone under the lights stronger than any spoken argument. One agent read aloud, "Federal arrest warrant, charges of organized financial fraud." Chaos erupted. People whispered loudly, chairs scraped, heads bent over the documents. Daniel snapped his head toward his wife, eyes wide, mouth open but speechless. I looked at Bri and saw her real face for the first time, fear, naked and furious. Her mask fell to the floor in front of everyone, and the only thing ringing in my mind was, the truth exploded. The air after the hearing carried the scorched smell of a great fire, the kind that reveals the bare bones of everything Bree had twisted for so long. I stood in the hallway as the officers prepared to escort her out, my heart heavy like stone, yet light like a tumor had finally been cut out after years of growing silently. I watched Daniel sink into a chair, hands gripping his head, while Lucas remained at a quiet distance, his eyes sharp as if expecting any desperate counterattack from Bree. But it was time for consequences, and she had nowhere left to run. Bree screams as the handcuffs close. 2 federal agents approached her, one reading each word of the arrest charge with clinical precision. "Amber Cole, you are under arrest for federal financial fraud, identity falsification, and organized deception." Bree thrashed like a trapped animal. As the cuffs clicked around her wrists, she whipped her head toward me, rage draining all color from her face. "You old hag is nothing but a walking wallet. I deserved everything." Her scream echoed down the hallway, then cut short by the officer's order to remain silent. In that moment, I didn't see a woman. I saw a parasite that had chewed through every family she touched. Camera flashes burst behind her as reporters captured the scene, her real name exposed on evening news broadcasts. A historic collapse she had built with her own lies. Daniel bears the price of blindness. Daniel fell to his knees right outside the courtroom, his shoulders shaking as if he had just watched the sun die. He lifted his eyes toward me, red and desperate, his voice cracked and unsteady. "I'm sorry, Mom. I was wrong. I let her control me." The air thickened between us, full of the unspoken sentences years in the making. I placed my hand on his shoulder, gentle, like a mother learning how to forgive herself first. "You didn't lose me," I said slowly. "You only lost yourself." Daniel broke down in front of me, and for the first time in years, I saw the child inside him, the one who had wandered too far after trusting the wrong heart. That very afternoon, Daniel filed for divorce, finally confronting the wreckage that his marriage to Bree left behind. It was the first step toward reclaiming his life. The bright ending. Weeks later, the court issued the official sentence. Bree received 12 to 18 years in federal prison, with all her assets seized to compensate her victims. Each line of that sentence felt like a blade slicing through the power she had used to suffocate so many lives. I recovered everything she had stolen from me, the houses, the savings, every dollar she tried to pull from my hands. The day I signed the final document restoring my ownership, I realized my hands no longer trembled. I chose to move to a new place far from the whispers, far from the house where Bri tried to paint me as incompetent. A small coastal town where mornings smelled of salt and evenings hummed with ocean waves. I bought a modest home, planted a few pots of flowers, and for the first time in years, I understood what it meant to live without looking over my shoulder. Lucas kept in touch, no longer the mysterious figure in the shadows, but a steady presence who arrived exactly when my world was collapsing. Some afternoons we sat together at a cafe by the sea, watching the sun melt into the horizon. He didn't talk much, but his eyes always seemed to ask whether I had finally found peace. And every time, I smiled, knowing I had stepped out of the storm. I ended my story with the realization that struck me the day Bree was taken away. I thought I lost everything, but it turns out I only lost the people worth losing. As for Lucas, perhaps our journey is only just beginning. I once thought my life ended the moment Bree slammed that bar door in my face, shutting me out of the very family I had poured my entire soul into building. But as it turns out, sometimes God closes a door so you finally understand you were never meant to stay in that room. In the months after the trial, I lived a life I never dared to imagine. In the mornings, I drank coffee by the window facing the sea, listening to the waves like whispers, reminding me that every wound will someday soften. In the afternoons, I walked along the sand, letting the wind lash against my skin like a ceremony of shedding the past. Sometimes I looked at myself in the mirror, not as the woman who was used, slandered, pushed to the edge, but as someone reborn, clearer and stronger than before. I had lost things, yes, but I was not defeated. Daniel slowly returned to a decent life. He called every week asking how I was eating, how my health was. One day he said, voice thick with regret, "Mom, I hope someday you can forgive me." I answered, "Son, I always forgive you. I just need time to forget the pain." And that was the day I learned forgiveness isn't for others, it's to free myself. Lucas visited my little town from time to time. He no longer brought files, evidence, or talk of hunts and investigations. He came with peace and something warm slipping quietly into my life. One evening, as we watched the sun sink into the water, he asked Margaret, "If you could choose again, would you live differently?" I smiled. I would live exactly the same, because that painful road brought me to this moment. He didn't reply, but his eyes said more than words could. And in that moment, with the wind lifting my hair, I realized I walked through hell to discover that paradise was just behind a door I never dared to open. I close my story with a calmness I paid many years to earn. I didn't defeat Bree through hatred. I won because I stood up. And when I stood up, the truth stood with me. Now, every morning when I step down the sunlit stairs, I know something simple yet precious. Happiness isn't something someone hands you. Happiness is what you rebuild after being destroyed. And Lucas, he still walks beside me, sometimes close enough that I can hear the quiet steadiness of his breath. Maybe our journey has only just begun.